welcome to Grow Conversations, your window into the world of medical cannabis here in the United Kingdom. My name's Alex Fraser, and before we get stuck and cracking into our first guest of 2024, I just want to say a really quick thank you to everyone who's been following us so far. Grow Conversations has been a bit of a labour of love. Started during COVID lockdowns. We did a few episodes face-to-face last year. We're going to be doing a lot more content for you this year. Very excited about all the guests that we've got lined up. Particularly excited about our first guest, which is the wonderful James Watson, nurse at Integro Clinics. Welcome, James. Thanks for joining the show.
Hey, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
I've been dying to get you on. I was going to say, out of all the people in this industry, all the healthcare professionals, your name comes up again and again when I'm speaking to patients, when I'm speaking to doctors, when I'm speaking to other professionals in this industry. So I'm super happy to have you here, and thanks for making the time, because I know that you're so busy day in, day out with the patients that you're managing and the work that you do. So really appreciate you giving us this time today.
No worries.
So I think the first thing to start off with, what we'll do is what I like to call BC, which is we'll do a bit of a timeline. We'll go BC, we'll go before cannabis. So what were you? It's a bit cheesy. We're trying this for this. I mean, if it doesn't come up in the next episode, you'll know that this didn't land. But it'd be fascinating to hear about your career path. What were you doing before you got involved in cannabis in any way?
So I've had a really interesting career, and I've been really, really lucky with some of the exposure that I've had. Just been in the right place at the right time, getting a good job role. But I qualified in 2009, and I'd wanted to be a nurse for a very, very long time, since I was a very small child, actually. So it's always been something I wanted to do. And interestingly, my family were all like, no, James, you want to be a doctor. But I was very sure about what I wanted to do. But so I qualified in 2009. And I actually ended up in Northern Ireland for the first year of my career, year and a half. Worked in Enniskillen and then Belfast, and had a great time there. Really kind of, that first year in nursing. Sort of had a really interesting kind of working up. I was a charge nurse for a bit, and then eventually got involved in change management, and particularly change management within community care and nursing care homes. And that's kind of how I've sort of began to get into this sort of change management roles, and eventually got a job as an area manager for a large private nursing company. And it was sort of advanced nursing care at home. It was a failing service, and I went in to kind of be the kind of the manager of change, lead change, and really within 18 months, we changed that service around. And it being multifactorial, it was the whole of the north of Scotland, lots of teams and members. So it had lots of moving parts. And for me, that's what I just absolutely loved. With that came, just off the back of that success, came an offer from NHS Scotland to come manage some of their hospitals and lead some of the change that was happening within the changing priorities of the Scottish Government. And that is, there's a more of a community focused priority for resources, right? So moving away from that traditional community hospital into the community and redistribution of resources.
That's one of their big 5-year plans, isn't it? One of those big NHS 5-year plans for, I know NHS Scotland had that particular focus on communities, didn't they?
They've been doing it for quite a while now as well, and it's starting to bite in now. So we were part of building a new hospital within that area and closing those facilities down. And it was really interesting. I really, really enjoyed it. I had, interestingly though, huge amounts of stress, and exposed to quite, interesting stuff. I've had a really interesting. I've been very lucky, but again, my obsession has been nursing, has been healthcare, leading change in failing healthcare services. That was kind of the real kind of thing that got me up out of my bed in the morning.
From a young age.
Yeah, from about 7 years old, I think.
Why do you think that is? Why? I mean, I guess not just why nursing, but why do you think that you wanted to be in something that where you're caring for other people and looking for what about you that led into that sort of mindset, do you think?
I don't know. It was instinctive.
Just came to you naturally?
It
Nothing
was
in
in
the family, no medicine, no parents in medicine.
no, none of that. They were all
That's
business
quite common, isn't
owners.
it?
They were
Oh,
all
right.
business.
Completely
Yeah.
bucked the trend then.
Oh, completely. Yeah, absolutely. But my interest in my nana's neighbour was a
Hmm.
nurse,
Oh,
and
okay.
right, and she was amazing, and she was just an incredible lady. She would talk about her job, and she just was incredible.
Mm.
Interestingly, years later, when I was a second year nursing student, and I was placed to medical receiving, she was my mentor.
No way. What's the
Right, so
chances of that happening? There's thousands of
in the
nurses surely
Highlands,
doing that
probably
stuff.
quite actually
Okay,
high.
all right.
But,
Maybe it's not quite.
but actually, it was just really no. I mean, the system's huge. So it was quite amazing. It
Still.
was like, great,
Mm.
yeah. So I got
Hmm.
to see her other side, and actually that kind of that caring side that was always part of who she was. But she also had this black humor side, and that is key to being a good clinician in some ways, a good nurse, especially. I think is that you have a
That's
really
funny.
black humor. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that from a lot of clinicians. I think because you deal with so much serious subject matter as every single day, minute by minute, right? That's your bread and butter. It's you. I think it's a survival technique, isn't it, for healthcare professionals that you sort of you have to laugh or you cry. Is that the?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. It's you forget your place though sometimes, and you know, you maybe at
Mm.
Christmas dinner or whatever, you drop a clanger.
When you start talking
Right.
about something terribly traumatic in a very light-hearted way, is that?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Or asking really like nosy questions,
When
you
you start
know.
doing diagnostics at the while you're eating
Right?
your
Yeah,
turkey.
street diagnosing. Yeah. uh, So, yeah, that's
But your family have always been supportive of you doing this work and getting in nursing,
yes,
and yeah,
they absolutely
fantastic.
have. Yeah, they
Has
absolutely
that changed at all? Then it's sort of transitioned into cannabis. I'm skipping parts of the conversation here, but we'll get back to how you got into
have.
cannabis and all that stuff. But did they have any problem with that?
No, it was a change because
Mm,
I had quite a significant career that I gave up, right?
mm.
So,
How did that happen?
um,
Go on, talk us through it, if you would.
I, I'd always had PTSD and always lived with it, which is
Mm.
quite common. So you have this kind of first traumatic event. Just to give you a bit of background, by the way.
Sure, sure.
Um, and then you have a second traumatic event. And for me, that was while I was working at NHS Scotland,
Mm,
and through me, and I'm really open about it because that there was a period of my life that was really, really difficult, and that I never thought that I would be in that situation, right? And so, you know, cannabis has always recreationally been in my life, as in friends. You see it; it's
yeah.
everywhere, right?
Mm,
Um, but at the time, to be honest, I was predominantly drinking wine. I was having a half bottle of wine or a glass of wine,
oh
and
well.
you can go into work the next day and say, "Yeah, I had a couple of glasses of wine last night,"
Mm,
really to try and help me sleep, to try and knock me out, and it
mm,
just it's not good. And but again, it's more socially acceptable, and maybe the culture that I'm in as well in the Highlands of Scotland, it's a wee bit more
mm,
kind of acceptable. Um, but I just wasn't sleeping, Alex, and I was getting more and more unwell, and I wasn't really fully aware. I knew, that I wasn't operating 100%. Really, it was the sleep, the lack of sleep, and my partner had always tried to encourage me to like have a smoke before bed to get some
mm,
sleep. Right. But yeah, so there was one day I came home very upset, very emotional, and yeah, I kind of had a couple of puffs to help me
mhm,
sleep, and I slept very well that night.
mm.
I do not recommend it. It was illegal, and I don't condone
Sure.
that in any shape or form. But at that point, for me, I was in crisis.
Mm,
Um, so I had a really good sleep that night. I laughed in the right way. I had a bit of a cry in the right way. I
mm,
ate dinner that night for the first time in a bit, and really, I had a good sleep. I was still as I was still pretty stressed and unwell, but
mm,
I was able to face it and really just there was a bit of a period where I kind of had to go, do you know what? Actually, this has allowed me some reflection. This cannabis has
mm,
allowed me some reflection. This isn't working for me. This career ain't working for me anymore, and I'm not getting that same buzz that I used to get from it. And I took a year out pretty much. And with that year, I kind of just did a lot of soul searching and reflection and what I wanted to do. And I tried to go back to the NHS, and my colleagues were so supportive. It just, I knew at that point that I just didn't want to go back. And I remember going to the hospital. I was one of the hospital sites I was managing, and just knowing I desperately did not want to be there. And
I know it's
so
so difficult for anyone to make that break with the NHS because the institution is so beloved, and for people in your position, it's been part of your training. It's there as sort of the background to your career, isn't it? So
it's
I know that's
everything.
so difficult to leave behind, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it's everything. It's like DNA. Your very makeup. And I think what happens is you work so many hours all the time that actually your family become those teams,
Mm.
and you don't have hobbies at home. There's not much going on at home other than maybe, so you can become quite fully in depth into it. So when you leave it, it's a big decision because there's a loss of identity because that's James. He's the senior charge nurse for Badenoch and Strathspey, so that it's really difficult. There's a kind of a. I absolutely knew that I just wasn't going to be able to do the job effectively ever again, and a lot of research. And actually, funnily enough, it was I've been a constant academic. It was a cannabis thing, and I googled it, and I'm like, hold on a minute, it's legal. What? And
When
then
was that? When was that you did that? Because just year wise, because it's fascinating to me
we're
how the time
talking
between it legalized and people realizing. Sorry.
2021. Yeah,
Okay, so a
June.
couple of years, 2 or 3 years, two and a
Yeah,
half maybe. Okay.
yeah, and didn't have a clue. And I was, never had seen it in healthcare. Never had to come across a
Mm.
patient.
That's not unique to you. I don't think that's your lack of knowledge or awareness. I would, for those who are watching, I think that's uniform throughout
Yeah,
healthcare, throughout the general public. Many people still don't know, and we're 5 years down the line. So, no, good
we've
for
got
you
a
for
lot of
googling
our
and. Mhm.
outreach work, haven't we? We've got a lot
Oh
of,
yeah.
yeah, definitely. But just seen that jobs had come up as well. So I was just like, oh well, great. I'm going to apply for this. I'm going to apply for the medical cannabis because it's going to make me feel better about having it in the house.
Mm.
And
As a
um,
patient, yeah.
as a patient and be treated properly. Or
I mean, it's such a common narrative that I hear as well when it's what you describe of, oh, here, just try a little bit of this, and it's always the illegal stuff because
Mm.
very few people are sharing their prescription medicine, whereas someone who's using it legally will probably be more generous.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and that because my story is very very similar. I know lots of other healthcare professionals who are in this now who have similar stories, and they combine that personal experience with their professional life. Do you find that is ever a difficulty for you? Do you find that your own personal experience is ever a hindrance, or do you think it's always
Um,
obviously it's a benefit? I think obviously that,
yeah, I think it's a benefit, but I think that's a really pertinent question because we can be technocrats as well, right?
mm,
So we can do a bit dead end thinking, right?
hmm
So maybe we can apply the medical model to cannabis where that doesn't work.
mm.
It just you can't apply that medical model to medical cannabis. Um, but yeah, that's actually quite interesting because I think you're onto something there. Yeah.
Something we potentially have to have a wider conversation with more people to get a proper idea. I just my thought process is if you are using it day to day. One of the problems I have to distance myself from my own experience. I spend so much time talking to patients about the medicines they have and the effects they have on them.
Yeah.
They'll tell me medicine X has this effect, and I'll be like, I can't even imagine it having that effect on someone. Having taken that medicine myself,
Hmm.
it's hard to believe, and you sort of have to distance yourself from your own experience and just take on face value what the patient is saying. And I don't know if that personal experience gets in the way at all, but perhaps that's a wider conversation we need to have. And maybe we need to do a study or something more thorough down the line. That's the
Yeah.
problem with these in-depth conversations with you guys is we always end up with ideas of wouldn't it be fascinating if we could find that out on a large scale and really dig into that more. But I'd
But
love
no,
to
the
hear more about. Sorry, go
on the
ahead.
whole, sorry, Alex.
Anyway.
The experience on the whole has been really positive. The experience the application has been quite a positive thing because I think what I've struggled with within this space is sort of potentially sort of operational leads with no healthcare experience.
Mm-hmm.
dealing with quite complex healthcare systems that, take years of training and experience to deal with, actually. And even the ones that have got that experience and training still struggle with it. So
Mm.
I think there's a wider conversation about how we bring in what is standard practice within healthcare, making sure that it's applicable to medical cannabis, and that we're following the principles that we know work and are laid down, are going to keep people safe, but ultimately as well, keep the patient safe and the industry safe as well. Because I think, we want to ensure that all systems are, the systems that we've got in place are robust, safe, that we're monitoring patient responses to medications, and ultimately, because we're still a very early industry as well, and I think there is an element of we kind of have to prove ourselves a little bit, as the sort of the evidence comes in and the personal experiences of the patients. Yeah.
I suppose that's an interesting point. So, 2021, you applied for the job. I presume you got the job
Mm-hmm.
quite quickly. I'm sure you had no problem with that. But I suppose what's changed from when you started working in the clinics to now? What's developed? What learnings have been put into place, and what do we do now? Or what do you do now in practice that not because it was oversight, but because it just generally wasn't done before? What is important now that you weren't doing originally, or that you or that was seen, I suppose, by you and the team and rectified?
Yeah, I think the big thing's definitely the supply issues that we had right at the beginning, and again that kind of embryotic stage of the industry. And actually, I think we've maybe 2023 maybe would be a year by which we could watermark it, that the industry matured a little bit and prices came down, and we saw more products, more medicines available, and but I think, the supply of medicines, I think that's been the big thing. And when you start a patient on a specific medication and that runs out. So I think we've become much cleverer, much better at bringing bringing producers online into the space, especially from outside, because we're still not quite here yet in the UK. We're getting there though, beginning of.
I think it'll be a big year for UK cultivators. That's a whole nother, and we'll the teaser for later episodes. We'll have a few of them on Grow Conversations to have a chat with what it's like to grow large amounts of cannabis in the UK completely legally. So that'll be fun. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I mean, the supply issues has been and for the early stages was a real problem, and I think that it highlights how early this is and still is. I keep saying it, 5 years down the line, this is still the very, very beginnings of this. There are still very few healthcare professionals engaged at all. So, fantastic.
One of the other interesting things, actually, and I think this is really good, is, well, there's a couple of things, but we were really kind of basic in that sativa morning into Canite, and that's how we communicated that to patients as well, and only offering a very slim choice of products, whereas what we do know is each strain can have a sort of a unique effect on patients' symptoms and throughout the day as well, depending on what's going on. So I think there's a bit of an art going on there. We've kind of really kind of sharpened our knowledge and the anecdotal stuff as well. So again, having that kind of build up of knowledge and experience has been really important, and I think we're getting better at managing patient expectations around medical cannabis as well. I think education's been a big thing in how we communicate with patients. So yeah, I think 2024 is going to be a really interesting year for cannabis. I am so excited for it. I really am. I think we're getting to a critical point now in terms of size.
I think so. In terms of general awareness, I think we're seeing, and it's interesting. It brings me to a point I was going to bring up way, way, way later down in the conversation. But institutions across the UK, not just healthcare, but policing institutions, patients, employers, these confrontations that are happening with patients across the UK, where essentially someone with a prescription comes across an authority in their lives who is not aware that it's legal, and there's an education. How much of a role do you play in those sort of confrontations? Are you brought in? Do you hear about these things? Is that something that
Yeah,
you talk to your patients about?
definitely. The police thing's the big thing. So quite often I speak to various police officers across the country, and it's really dependent. I mean, I'd one drug cop who's specialist in drug and alcohol, and he was adamant it wasn't legal until I sent him the white paper. Was really rude about it, and then phoned back a couple of hours later and was really apologetic. So, I think the engagement, I think the interaction with patients and the police is maybe getting a little bit better in that, but just that the police are becoming more aware of it. Stigma's like comes across the whole sort of spectrum of someone's life. And in particular, actually, more so if you're from a lower socioeconomic background, because quite often you're in, social housing. And again, we've seen instances of patients being evicted from their houses because of medical cannabis use, which is some of the worst stigma I've seen, quite frankly.
It's appalling, isn't it?
Yeah. The other big thing, Alex, I see all the time is it might be a single parent and they fall out with a neighbour, and the neighbour will report that person to the social work department, and then you're kind of in a sticky wicket with it. You're having to support the patient to explain to the social work the processes that we go through, what we're treating them for, and what our expectation is in terms of vaporization and not doing it in the house. So, it can be really difficult conversations. I think there's some like bias as well in that people just don't hear you, right? People, you can say it, they don't hear it, and I've heard things of like, it's of this department's view that it's not legal. Right. So, and then you go, oh God, well, it doesn't matter what your view is. It's the law.
It doesn't matter what department, where you're coming from. The law is, yeah.
Doesn't
Do
matter.
you get frustrated with those attitudes? Because I guess you're coming up with this again and again, these sort of very closed-minded. Oh, I'm not aware it's illegal. I'm not aware it's legally available. Therefore, it must be illegal.
Yeah.
Is that, does it grate? Does it get to
a
you?
little bit?
I'm
If
trying to
it's
get a
at home,
rise out of you, James, here a little
if
bit.
it's at home, I mean, I do get a bit annoyed when it's at home, right? So at Christmas,
Yeah.
I had a relative, and I'm okay to share this, but I had a relative say to me, and does stigma in cannabis annoy you? In that, like, gobsmacked, I'd be annoyed that some patient would be stigmatized. Well, obviously cannabis is really bad. Why would you be? So there's a bit of that. That's intellectual laziness, quite frankly. So that's kind of, but that's then my opportunity to upskill and educate, Alex. And I do it with great glee as well.
Even around the Christmas table.
Even around the Christmas, if they bring it up, even around the Christmas table.
So hopefully we won't get you in trouble for that one. There won't be one less Christmas card for this anecdote next year.
No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
It's good.
No, I think that just reducing stigma, Alex. I think that's like, I definitely think just being like, whether, I'm sure it'll be okay, but I think it's important for patients. I think,
I think so. I think that's the next phase of things. We'll carry on from here. Where I obviously advocated for this law change to happen for 4.5 years, and then we got there, and then it was like, well, okay, job done, and that feels now in retrospect so naive to think that was going to be the end of the conversation. That a law change, something signed by government, and then that's all that we'll ever need to do. I think we even thought when we were campaigning that it would be, oh, your law change, and then it'll be NHS and it'll be fine. Which is, again, knowing what I know now, incredibly naive, and I wish we'd been smarter about how we were campaigning so that we could have maybe tied a few of these things up when the legislation happened. But things around landlords and stuff like that.
It was such a significant thing to happen. Anyway, Alex, real success was exactly just that legislation. It was, and the work that we've been able to do off the back of that as well. The lives that have been saved off the back of that, so
it's incredible to
I
think
hear
that
what you're saying.
Building, I suppose, it's naive to say it and think that it's surprising, but building an industry takes longer than changing a law, and changing minds also happens a lot longer time frame, sadly. there's a lot of minds that we need to change. Do you have much pushback from colleagues in healthcare? Obviously, outside of, and presumably your colleagues in cannabis clinics are quite supportive, but outside of that, do you find
Yes.
doctors, nurses in other areas treat you
I
differently because of what you do?
uh, yeah, kind of, kind of. Do you know, I always get it's either kind of one or two reactions, or three. And actually, the third one is just no reaction whatsoever.
Hmm.
Like literally, they won't say anything. They'll just like look at me. But there's a couple of reactions. Generally, people are inquisitive,
Hmm.
and want to know more. My friends that are doctors absolutely thought I was crazy. They thought I was nuts,
Yeah.
doing what I was doing, right? But that
What,
was
for what reason?
just in that it was a big deal to leave the NHS and
Hmm.
go into something that was potentially quite risky, and was at the right at the beginning. And again, just in terms of their view on cannabis, right? Yeah. So I think that's. But generally, I think most clinicians are really open to generally the open if they're good clinicians are open to new ideas
Hmm.
and won't reaffirm any confirmation bias to themselves, which can happen a lot. And
Yeah.
you know so quite often what's really interesting, I think we're seeing patches of it in the country. So in Northern Ireland, for example, the hospitals there are absolutely okay with it, no problem
Really?
at all.
I had no idea.
Yeah. Scotland not had any problems. Had one or two issues in England, but it's a big, much bigger country, so much
Hmm.
bigger population group.
Hmm.
But again, generally okay with it. And once they've had the phone call from me, the ward or wherever the patient's going, generally it's fine. Okay, no problem. We understand what it is, and so it's a bit of upskill, bit of education.
Hmm.
Again, most pain departments. That I hear feedback from patients who advise their teams that they're on cannabis are really positive about it, just in that they know they're getting really good pain cover. They're getting a good night's sleep. They're presenting at clinic very
Hmm.
well, and they're quite often either have significantly reduced their regular medications or completely stopped their medications. So once you start having those conversations, once the clinician starts seeing the
Yeah.
benefits to patients, the clinician's DNA is all about protecting the patient. And unfortunately, the default position for us at the moment is that actually the clinician information is out of date.
Hmm.
It's based on studies that were done on illicit market cannabis, like really high, huge amounts of THC, nothing else, and so we know, they're really it's based on faulty information.
Hmm.
Again, it's just working with people and providing evidence and case studies. Is always really helpful. I think from the police perspective, I think they're just pleased that they don't have to deal with it. And
Hmm.
but again, we need to have a wider conversation in this country around about what the drugs laws are and what does that mean.
Hmm.
So it can't be that it's just a purely criminal issue. It's got to be a health and social issue. We can't, we have to accept the fact that we're human beings first, and as a part of that, there is an element of there's an element of drug use. I've got to be careful what I say here. I've been thinking that one over.
Is it
Um,
what is it? Is it that there's a sort of natural propensity to want to alter your state of consciousness to an extent? I think that's
yes,
true in broader than even human
yeah.
beings, but in nature, I think that's true. Isn't it? There's other animals
And
that
if
do
we can
similar things.
educate and upskill
Mm.
while they're at festivals, maybe it's
Mm.
it's it's kind of harm reduction's my main thing.
Yeah.
How do we prevent people dying from doing what they're going to do anyway?
Well, yeah. Can we? If we can't curb usage, and I think if the war on drugs since the '60s has taught us anything, it's that you can militarize a country's police force and still not curb drug consumption. There has to be a way of making this safer for
Actually, see
people.
increases,
Yeah,
right?
across the
Yeah.
board. That's
Mhm.
universally in almost every country. It's unequivocally not the route, is it? And we're a little off piece, but I actually think it's really interesting because I was having a discussion today with a group of patients on a call where um, we were talking about the concept of sort of laziness or shiftlessness, I suppose, for want of a better word. And it's exactly that. forgive me, the viewers, for putting such a fine point on it, but it's the people on the dole, people on benefits, using cannabis, sitting on the sofa, with a 50-inch TV, not trying to get a job, blah, 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 blah. This whole, that stereotype, and I'm not trying to proliferate that, suggesting that's a real thing at all. And actually, the outcome of the conversation was, this is all stigmatic in a very similar way to cannabis. And cannabis is just lumped into this wider stigma around productivity, where those who feel they need to be very productive or very active, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but I think there's a subset who look at the rest of the world who are maybe not so productive or proactive for whatever reason and judge them for it. And what they're actually doing here is looking at a very surface level and not really thinking there's almost certainly a reason beneath the surface that that person is the way they are. It's rare, like the idea it's a moral fault is absurd to me, and I think that that understanding that it's probably there's almost certainly a psychiatric reason why, if someone's not got a physical reason for not being active, there'll be a reason why. That I think humans are naturally, we want to do things, create, build things, have fun, go out, meet people, do stuff. If we don't want to do that, if there's not a desire, there's a deeper issue that's not the fault of people. It's not like a moral decision they make. I think that's cannabis gets lumped into that.
It's very dangerous as well, because people with that stigma, and people are boxed in, they're stereotyped, poorer health outcomes, increased psychiatric issues because of the way they've been treated. It's really difficult. I definitely
it's a spiral,
think,
isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it's so sad. I find it very frustrating, and again, it's just making sure that you're like self-reflecting, right? That self-reflecting on your own opinions and to be challenged on it, right? We're in a world where we've had significant economic issues, and what happens off the back of that, and a little bit off piste again, but is that increase in this kind of populism. And that can feed into there's a whole thing that can feed into that as well, and it worries me actually hugely.
A culture of judging other people, I think, for a multitude, of finding a reason to judge them, and this is great. I mean, not going off piste at all. I'm very, we're here for this social conversation. I think this is an important part of being part of the cannabis industry, is understanding the social implications of what we do, and cannabis absolutely fits into that. And it's fascinating where's the crossover between cannabis and populism, or cannabis and that sort of social media judgmental culture of this group or that group, they do this or they do that, or I don't like these people because of this reason, rather than going out and getting to know those people and getting to know the individual behind that and their motivations and reasons for being who they are and doing what they do. So that's
I mean, we talk about
what a topic.
Stigma is literally built into the IT systems. It's built into our systems, right? And that again, quite often I see it might be that a patient has gone to their GP and said, I'm on medical cannabis, or it might be that, look, doctor himself medicating is the only thing that seems to be helping. And then they're that's popped down, and what comes up is dependent drug user or, recreational cannabis user. And again, that is literally stigma built into the very system that we operate within, right? So
the NHS, which we're all contributing to as well. It has this,
surgery, software,
What here's I'll put you on the spot here, James, and feel free to defer the question if it's too I don't even know the word, but what would be the way to resolve this? What would you like to implement? What could be done? Is it something the NHS needs to do? Is it the BMA? Is it who needs to come in, and what could be provided to? Is it like a top-down review of everything? I mean, it feels so all-encompassing when you say that. It's
it's got to be top down. It has to be government led. I guess we've got the legislation there, right? But the legislation is not ideal. So I think there has to be a change there. And I think, but ultimately the NHS is going to have to take on the prescription costs for patients. End of. And if they don't find the flower palatable to prescribe or to fund, then they need to be funding the oils like yesterday, because ultimately we've got patients who are suffering a lot and who are using having to use their precious resource on healthcare when they've they already have a healthcare service.
Mm.
So, but yeah,
They're
I
paying
think
twice, aren't they? That's what
yeah,
you're
they're
saying. I
paying
mean,
twice.
I just want to put a finer point on that, because I hear it from patients a lot. The
Mhm.
frustration. You're pumping money in, you pay your taxes for your NHS, and obviously other things besides, of course. But and in more often than not, the patients have not had success through the NHS. That's why they're looking into alternatives. And then they're obviously, once they find an alternative, they're then paying, they continue to pay their taxes into the NHS. They're getting very little from that, and then paying privately for something that then does work. It's not a tenable position to be in. I think we'll have more campaigns for patients pushing for that. Whether that will be successful, who knows? It's an interesting caveat. While we're on the point, sorry for this is meant to be me interviewing you, but you've got me talking.
Oh, yes.
Um, you just the idea that you could campaign to get an NHS, or sorry, medicine reimbursed by the NHS. What I say to patients back when they say yes, we absolutely need to do that campaign is, well, if you start campaigning for something that's ultimately really financially beneficial to a pharma company, then we will end up with a multitude of campaigns 5 years from now funded by pharma companies for drugs that they don't want to do clinical trials with and they don't want to test properly, but they do want to get into the NHS and get these contracts. So there's just to play the devil's advocate, I guess, and say, look,
Yes.
I 100% agree with you. This is an untenable position. How do you resolve that? How do we resolve that, Jay? That's
Data and evidence. And just it's got to be underpinned with evidence. I think the evidence is really patchy in some places, in some areas, and then we've got lots of research in other areas. But yeah, I think it's got to be research led. I definitely think that there has to be leadership from NHS on this. I don't see. I'm not seeing any. I might be maybe wrong on that, but I'm just not seeing any. What I am seeing is socially vulnerable patients being taxed twice. And also, they're saving the NHS a significant amount of money quite often because, again, reduction in opioids, gabapentinoids, all of those
surgeries.
surgeries, going back and forth to your doctor, back and forth specialist services, all of that. I would definitely like to, I think, in terms of that top-down change, some of the changes I would like to see is just actually, maybe it's allowing private GPs to do the initial consultations and prescribing. And I think it needs to be, again, sort of evidence-led and evidence-based. Also, the other thing, just in terms of stigma, we have to lead as well. So us within the industry, we have to also be the voice of change and making sure that we're really getting the right information out there, because we know every day I see lives are changed, lives are improved. In particular, I'm seeing a real increase in the older adult actually coming to us who maybe experienced some cannabis back in the 60s or 70s recreationally, but again have reached the end of the line of their opioids for arthritic type conditions or whatever else is going on for them. And so I think once we see I guess my point is, once we see an expansion into the wider population, that's when we're going to start to see that maybe pockets of the NHS will start looking to change their funding position.
I suppose it's what you said earlier about the proof in the. I don't think you said this term, but the proof in the pudding. When doctors see the effect it has on their patients, when they were previously skeptical, then that's what essentially converts them and makes them realise the benefits. And I think it'll be the same on sort of a wider societal scale, where the more that happens, more doctors will see, and you'll get a surge of doctors saying, "Oh, we do need to do this research and these studies." And doctors are generally listened to by pharma companies, who then might invest in trials, also by the regulators, who also might support trials. But you're right about cost effectiveness too, cost comparisons. That for me feels like a really important move forward for patients to review their healthcare pre-cannabis and after, and put those. And if it'd be great to see somebody doing a large-scale trial with prescription cannabis patients, because it's an area where we can lump them all in together and make an economic point with data. Whereas I think the problem with the clinical trials and doing trials into efficacy and symptom management, disease management, all these things, is there's too many different types of patient. It's very hard to find a large group of any one type of patient, and you get these broad trials that are doing all chronic pain, and it's just, and then you get the difficulty of not if one medicine for all of those that large group of patients. The broader the group of patients, the less likelihood that you're going to find a medicine that works for the lot of them. That brings down your efficacy score, your potential treatment score for that drug. So yeah, we're in this chicken and egg phase where we need enough patients to do the trials. We need the trials to get more patients, more acceptance is going to help doctors. And this, it's all spiraling upwards and building, and it's exciting to see. But I imagine the day to day of it is frustrating for someone like you who's directly interacting with those patients as well.
I saw a study somewhere, Alex, and it was, I think it was something like, I want to say, I can't remember the number, but it was like around about 70% of the population at that point just weren't aware. And this was only a few years ago. And there is sort of clinics out there who are doing sort of advertisements and things like that. And that is kind of improving the kind of knowledge base across the. What's interesting though is when you start to see that certain areas where one person's got their medical cannabis prescription and then is obviously informed other people, and you start to see pop-ups of lots of communities, so there is almost a kind of a wildfire effect of it. But it's frustrating. I find it a wee bit frustrating. I think just in terms of getting the message out there, I think I hear sometimes even sort of stigma coming from patients themselves in terms of the medical, in terms of cannabis. I think as well we need to make I think it's really important just to continue to make that real distinction between illicit market and medical cannabis, and all the other little minor cannabinoids and CBD and all the lovely things that are a part of the plant that keep the plant safe in a lot of ways, right?
Just going back to the medical and the rec side of things, how do you broach that conversation when you're talking to someone? Let's say you're talking to a patient who's previously been using illicit cannabis. They've come to you for the first time at the clinic. They want to know what's different. What is this compared to what I was using?
Quite often that what will happen is the patients think that they're managing their symptoms with illicit market, but they're not. But what they're finding is actually, I find that there's a high increase. Yeah, they're going to get a good night's sleep, maybe, right, potentially, or a better night's sleep. But the potential for the medical cannabis, the efficacy is so much higher. It is a very different experience. In that it quite often removes anxiety, whereas illicit market, my anecdotal experience with patients is it increases anxiety. And so without a doubt, some of the conversations definitely around about, talking about sort of the things that they would spray on the plant in illicit market spaces, maybe some of the processes, human, in terms of slave labour, that's in terms of illicit market, and it's actually an unsafe product because essentially what you're getting is a high THC product that you don't know entirely what it is. If it's a sativa, what might give you anxiety, it might give you spikes of anxiety where you literally don't want to leave the house, and that can happen. So some of the things that's really interesting within that 4-week period of a patient, the patient's almost gobsmacked at the difference in the product. Quite often, naturally, patients just will maybe stop gambling, they start reducing opioids, they stop drinking, they start going for walks if they're able to. They can re-establish some of the relationships that they've got. And that, again, is twofold, with a reduction in anxiety, part-time job and looking for cannabis the whole time, the illicit market, and ultimately reduction in opioids that can have an effect on your personal relationships with family, friends, your community. So what we just see is a whole life quality improvement. I'm not talking dramatic. It's not magical at all. And there's, but what we do, and within the first 4 weeks, the patient has then really does not want to go back to illicit market. and
And
that's
that's sort of the general trend, right? That's the outcome you see more often than not, right? Is that
yeah,
there's,
absolutely.
and these are people who have experience, like extensive experience, decades sometimes, and more of,
Yeah,
illicit, and they know their stuff.
yeah, they know that. Yeah, they know it very well,
Mm.
and
I think there's a value. I suppose if you know your stuff, there's a value in having more information about the product, and I think that's something that we can, via doctors and via healthcare professionals, you guys can provide more information about where these products have come from, exactly what's in them, exactly how to dose them, what times of day to use them. Um, do you feel like that extra level of support is key too, though? I think that often it's misunderstood and not given enough attention, and it brings me to one of the final points I really wanted to hammer home and ask you about, really, is the importance of nursing, specifically nurses in cannabis clinics, because there are some clinics that don't have nurses, there are some that have maybe one or two, there are some that really put a focus on nurses managing their patients day to day, and it's my view that that's an integral part of a quality clinic. What do you think? How do you think that makes a
agreed,
difference?
agreed. I mean, the nurse role is a really unique, but it's like exceptionally adaptable. It's like the Swiss Army knife of clinicians, right? And we can sort of do and say a lot more things that maybe potentially other people can't, and that in terms of patient advocacy and that kind of stroppiness with colleagues if things don't go our patient's way, right? We're very
That's what
protective.
advocacy is. It's just
That's
stroppiness
what
with your
it
own
is.
colleagues.
Yeah,
My
that's it.
colleagues that grow watching this will know well.
um, I definitely think look, the nurse role's essential. I think that you're kind of you're at a disadvantage without nurses because there's an extra level of safety. We are just natural risk assessors. We're instinctive risk assessors, and we're trained risk assessors, and constantly mitigating. I think the big thing is yeah, patient advocacy, harm reduction, communication. The the assessment of for patients when they first join, especially legacy patients, like you say, they do, they've maybe been self-managing, they've not had support from their wider healthcare team because of the stigma attached to to cannabis. So I think then there's an application of some of my skill set that I can use and overlay that with the medical cannabis stuff and really support the patient, because it's not just about the drug either, so it's also looking at the patient's nutrition, physiotherapy, what's happening, where's the patient at in terms of investigations, recommending sort of other therapies that might be useful. And there's all sorts of things that we might recommend. It might be particularly looking at nutrition, and again, I think of the trio that really is important for for winter, and that's like vitamin D2, K3, and magnesium. And even just recommending that to a patient can really improve sleep, anxiety levels, and again, all based on evidence. We can recommend that, right? I guess it's also helping patients reassess their relationship with cannabis, okay? And again, moving away from a space where, yes, they're self-medicating, but it's predominantly to kind of serve recreational needs, right? And moving into a fully healthcare wraparound support. And there isn't anything my patients can't talk to me about, right? There isn't. And that is really helpful, that a patient can come to the table, open communication, and work as a partner. And I think that's definitely something, that I'm going to take from my own personal experience of mental health issues, and that is humanity first, right? I'm going to treat you like a human being first, with the dignity and respect that you deserve. And I think just that in itself, taking people out of the shadows, that is always a good thing, keeping people safe, knowing that every 4 months, they're going to see me and we're going to get the crack. We're going to, house things, we're going to develop a relationship with these people, and long term. And, I genuinely love my patients. Like there really isn't a day where I don't just, really interesting people as well. I'm very lucky. I realize every morning I wake up, I realize how lucky I am doing what I'm doing. Get to work from home and work with really interesting folk. Yeah.
That's lovely
Long
to hear.
Yeah.
Oh, and it's not a word of a lie because I hear it every day from patients when I'm speaking to them. They're like, "Oh, James, he's such a sweetheart." Diamonds is the word I think is used repeatedly. He's a diamond, that James.
Shiny.
You gotta take these compliments when they come in.
Oh, you're making the Scotsman blush. Compliment.
Not an easy task, I hear.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop there before I get in trouble with an entire nation. Um, before we come and visit, in fact, as well, we are going to be visiting, I believe, Glasgow, but we're definitely doing a conference in Scotland this year. You'll be there. I'll be there. Lots of other interesting people will be there. We've got a lot of work to put that together in the next few months. It'll be spring to summertime. Yeah, you were there for the last one, right, in Belfast. What did you feel about that event? Yeah.
Again, we talk about breaking barriers and stigma. Patients were bringing along their relatives who maybe had issues with the medical cannabis, and they left that conference fully supportive. So again, I'm really looking forward to the Scottish conference, and if any, Scottish patients can make it, please come. Bring your relatives, bring your friends that aren't sure, because there's a whole range of people, specialists there. Industry insiders like yourself, Alex, all the way through to specialist consultants like Dr. Knight. And I think that's so important.
It's that opportunity to have that face-to-face conversation that you don't have day to day with your patients, and like I say, their relatives. They get to bring other people along and have that interaction, and we give them our time. I remember that one in Ireland being such a impactful event. It felt very similar to the sort of work I used to do as an advocate and a campaigner, which was just book a hall, give patients some space, a short amount of time, get on stage, tell their stories, and just to be accepted rather than judged for cannabis use by a large room full of people. It's the reason I got into this in the first place, was because I went to an event and I spoke, and that was hugely impactful to me.
It was
absolutely. It's such a pleasure to be able to provide that space and watch that unfold, and watch clinicians talk to patients, and everybody in the room sort of come to this understanding at the end that this is this thing that's actually really helping people and really making a difference.
We wouldn't be standing in the room if it wasn't for folk like you, though, Alex, right? And I think it's really important that we recognise that and underscore that, right? That
can make a southerner cry.
A lot of lives have been saved, right? They have, and Dr. Nye says this all the time. It saves lives. That's all you need to know about medical cannabis if you're not involved in it, right? It saves lives, and that's what I'll say to healthcare colleagues as well. That's all you need to know. It saves lives.
Yeah. I suppose if we'll round up with one final note from you to and as well as obviously it saves lives. But one final note from you to healthcare professionals in the UK. What would be your sort of last comment, your leaving thought?
Treat your patients with kindness if they show up with, "Well, I've got a cannabis prescription," or "I'm thinking about cannabis." Ultimately, I think it's really impertinent to upskill. So, I think it's just treat your patients with kindness if they show up. No judgment. Don't be like, "Oh, gobsmacked, that's terrible." No. Open space. Learn. Understand where has the patient come from, and that's really important. How have they arrived in front of you, and what have they had to face ultimately for that journey? So just treat kindness first.
Kindness first. I love that. Well, look, thank you, James. Honestly, I've been so excited to film with you. It's been fantastic. It's been insightful. It's been better than I could have imagined, and it's so nice to hear more about what you do day to day. I know we work with each other now and again, but we never get to sit down and have this level of intimacy unless we're recording a podcast for this purpose. So, honestly, a pleasure for me. I hope it's a pleasure for everyone at home. Thank you so much to everyone for watching, and thank you, James, for your time this evening. You've been a fantastic guest, and I look forward to speaking to you again in the future, hopefully.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next episode.